had some technical difficulties. Someone stole the wire, so we had. No, this is the first time someone stole the wire. Yeah. No, so someone stole the wire. So luckily we had a laptop and an HDMI cable that we stole from upstairs. We will return it. So we have Mike Moherab with us today, who is going to lead us in life hacks before Holy Week. As we all know, Passion Week is next week, so this will be a good preparation for us. So let's welcome Mike.
Thank you, Aki, and thank you, Rini, for the computer. So I just want to start by saying, I'm not sure how everybody else feels about this, but I'm going to tell you how I feel about it. I hate the term life hacks. I think it's a stupid term. I don't like the term. I don't like it because I find people use it instead of the word tips, which were around from the time I was born and before that. So instead of saying somebody saying, I have a tip, they say, I have a life hack, which just is their way of making it sound cooler for some reason. So I guess a life hack is supposed to be like a very fancy, advanced, you didn't think of it before way of looking at something that will be more efficient. But again, the other reason that I hate the term life hacks is because it doesn't tell you anything you didn't know. And that's exactly what this presentation is going to do. It's going to tell you everything you already knew. So for example, a life hack would be something like this. Save money on expensive binoculars by just standing closer to your object. Or if you want to get out of your student loan debt, die early. Or if you listen to relaxing music, that will help you relax. Or, I got a great life hack. If you don't want to get a speeding ticket, don't speed. It's just like a bunch of obvious things that because they get put on the internet, it suddenly gets called a life hack. So I automatically hate the term. It's like, I got a great life hack. You should eat vegetables. That's not a life hack. That's just a thing you should do. That's not... Anyway. So we have Holy Week every year. And I actually think that's a bit of a disadvantage to us relative to the early church. So the early church did not do Pascha and Passion celebrations and every year. They actually did it every 33 years. So that as a bit of an idea, that would be 1985, like Back to the Future 1985. So I think if we were to be doing Holy Week every 33 years, I think we would approach it in a very different way than we usually do, or at least I would approach it in a very different way than I usually do. I usually approach it like, I got to take some time off of work because I want to make sure I'm available for family and for church stuff. But if it was every 33 years, I would have a completely different approach. Taking time off work wouldn't be, I would take time off work, but that wouldn't even enter in my calculation. I'd have so much other things in my mind leading up to the week. The week starts off and ends with a funeral. And we'll come back to this in the end, but the reason that I bring up the idea of the funeral is because I think sometimes we lose the kind of gravity of what we're commemorating or what we're thinking about. If I go to a funeral for a family member or for a family friend, it's a solemn occasion, it's serious. It's not just serious and solemn for me when I go, like the whole week or the whole weekend or, that whole few days, my thoughts are kind of always consumed with whoever passed away. But I find sometimes when I go to Holy Week, it's kind of a reverse hypocrisy. So I show up to church and I'm solemn, but then as soon as the church service is done, I just breathe a sigh of relief and I'm happy again. And I'm not saying that you have to be sad during Holy Week. That's not what I'm trying to get at. But what I'm trying to get at is if you're feeling sad in church because of what you're thinking about, then you should be feeling just as sad outside of church. Or if you're feeling like you're remembering something about our salvation in a non-sad fashion, then that should kind of carry out outside of church. So what I find, it's more like the funeral in The Godfather. Anybody know like mafia funerals, what they're like? You don't have to answer because if you did, that would be self-incriminating, I suppose. But like a mob funeral isn't exactly the same as a normal funeral. A mob funeral, everybody's there. Everybody says, our condolences, but they don't actually feel that way, right? There's two levels to the mob funeral. There's what you see and what you really are thinking, which is which one of these people at the funeral is responsible for this tragedy. And I sometimes feel like I approach Holy Week in a similar fashion. There's the surface level solemnness, there's the surface level commemoration, but then there's other stuff going on that I don't actually tap into. So I thought maybe we could kind of consider Holy Week in terms of the Garden of Gethsemane to start. In my mind, there are so many parts of Holy Week that are worth kind of dwelling on and meditating on. But one of my favorite is actually the Thursday evening after Last Supper. So what happens Thursday evening after Last Supper, just so we're all on the same page? Yes, Jesus goes to the garden. He sweats blood while he prays. The disciples are sleeping multiple times. And then he gets arrested. So I think of this firstly because I love my sleep. I really love sleep. And every time I read this, I feel so bad for the disciples. Jesus comes back and he tells them, hey, stay up with me. And they're saying, yeah, we're going to stay up. And then they fall asleep. And I can see where they're coming from. When I was younger, I used to say to myself, I don't see how they could fall asleep in front of Jesus. Jesus is asking them to pray one night. Come on. Just like wake up and pray one night. But now, I crave my sleep so much, I see exactly where they're coming from. They want to stay up. And Jesus isn't yelling at them, but they want to stay up, they just can't. And so I ask myself, in my Holy Week, am I in a similar situation where the spirit is willing but the flesh is weak? Or where I know I want to kind of focus my whole mind, soul, and body into my worship, but my mind, soul, and body aren't following along? I don't know, does anybody have any thoughts or comments on that? It's okay if you don't. So, the other thing that we can think of in the Garden of Gethsemane are the different kind of people, and I find each of them has a bit of a parallel to my Holy Week. So we talked about the disciples falling asleep. Obviously, that's me falling asleep in church. How about the disciples being confronted by the soldiers and Peter with the sword? Any thoughts on the disciples? Yep.
I think sometimes we tend to jump to maybe like almost defend the right thing, but we don't realize that whether it's our words, actions, or even message that we relay can really, really hurt the person in front of us.
Absolutely. Peter's doing a good thing. He's got a sword. He's using it to defend Jesus. It makes sense, right? There's probably a bunch of times, and Holy Week is no less one of those times, where I think I'm defending the right thing, or I think I'm defending something in the right way, but I may be doing something that Jesus is not happy with. I may be doing something where Jesus is saying, no, I don't want you to do that. I can come up with a bunch of personal examples, but I'll leave it to everybody to come up with his or her own. But we can become very Pharisaic in our defense of what we think is right. And it's sometimes hard to find the line of, this is what's worth me standing up for and defending, and sometimes it's hard for me to find the line of, well, maybe this is the foreground, maybe I'm losing the trees for the forest here. Maybe I'm losing my focus on what's really important this week because of something in Arabic, hayf, less hayfa. Okay, all right. So, how about the disciples running away? They see the guards, but then after Jesus gets captured, the disciples are running away. One of them runs away so quickly that he runs away without clothes. Any parallels? Any thoughts?
It's when we run away from our faith in Christ.
Sure. Any specific, can you narrow it down to anything a bit more specific, for example, with my upcoming week? What's one way that Mike is going to run away from his faith or run away from Jesus this week that he's got to watch out for? Work. Sure. Okay, I took some time off work, but, work is so easy relative to having to spend so many hours praying. I'm sure that at some point in the disciples' mind when they're running away, somebody thought, I'm running away because I have to protect my family, or I'm running away because I have these other considerations. I'm sure it wasn't all, I'm running away because I'm a coward and I'm really scared. This part I won't ask about, but this part I was just going to say, betraying Jesus with a kiss. There are multiple times in my life where I can point to a time when I specifically let Jesus down, but let him down in a way that would have been reminiscent of letting him down with a kiss, or letting him down as his family, or as his friend. And then I put this comment, life is in the dark, because one, because I was half asleep when I came up with it. Again, I really craved my sleep. But also because I think sometimes, that kind of silence, that kind of emptiness allows me to really kind of connect. And there's a lot going on in the Garden of Gethsemane that we don't actually get from the Gospels explicitly. So what is Jesus, before Jesus gets captured and while the disciples are sleeping, what are they missing out? What did the disciples miss out on while they're sleeping? We get some of what Jesus is saying. Anybody? What's going on? What's going on in the garden?
He's stressed out.
He's stressed out? What is he stressed out about? What is he praying about? He knows what's going to happen. So if he knows what's going to happen, then why bother praying about it?
Maybe just praying about it and asking for help. Even he says, "Thy will be done and not mine." But maybe he receives some comfort from the Father.
But why did he need comfort? What was going on? Yeah, so he's suffering at that point, but and yes, there's the anticipation of great physical suffering. But is there something else going on?
He was alone. They were there. They didn't come and join him. I'm suffering. I'm going through this. But you guys don't care. You're just sleeping.
Very good. Was he really alone?
No.
Who was there with him?
Satan.
Absolutely. So, in the temptation of Christ, that's beginning of the gospel, that's after the Epiphany. Jesus is in the wilderness. How does Jesus get tempted in the wilderness? Food. And what is his answer? Okay. And then what else does he get tempted with?
The kingdom.
Kingdoms. And then what else does he get tempted with? We skipped one. Testing God, yeah. So, when we say that Satan tempted Christ, we're often talking about that passage in the gospel. But that's actually not the only time, like Satan didn't just give up then. That's the time where it's explicitly stated for us. But in fact, those same temptations were presented at this time during Holy Week in a much more magnified and a much more dramatic fashion. We're just not seeing it necessarily. Does that make sense? Because the same temptation about the physical suffering is being presented to Jesus. Avoid the physical suffering. The same temptation about, well, you know what? God will fix this. You don't need to be the one on the cross for all of these people's sins. You didn't do anything wrong, is presented. And the same temptation of, if you just give this part up and worship me, I have a whole bunch of other things that are a lot more pleasant for you. The same temptations, but in a much more dramatic fashion. Why dramatic? Because Jesus knows this is crucial. This is crucial for us. So now think back to the disciples sleeping. Or me sleeping. Jesus is struggling and is fighting at this point. I often think of the struggle and the fight on Good Friday, because that's easy to see, right? He's getting tortured, he's carrying the cross, he's getting crucified. That's a lot easier to see visually. But in fact, the struggle and the violence started earlier. And in fact, he was fighting for me, who was sleeping at the time. It's not that Jesus asked the disciples, I need you to stay up and pray with me because I need your help. It was, hey, you're going to want to stay up for this. This is for you. And then now when I think about my upcoming Holy Week, what parts of the week am I sleeping through? What parts of the week am I ignoring? What opportunities do I have to connect with Jesus while he fights for me and I get distracted? Even though I didn't really want to. Does that make sense? Or is that like too out there? Make sense? There's a great verse that I really love. The kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and men of violence take it by force. At some point, our spiritual life should be a violent struggle. At some point, if we don't think that we're fighting hard, then we may be losing the battle. The same way that it looks on the surface that Jesus is praying really hard in Gethsemane, it's actually a whole spiritual warfare that night. And similarly in my life, if I ignore the influence of the devil in trying to distract me, I run the risk of getting distracted and not realizing it. It's easy for me to say, well, you know, it was just really loud in church yesterday. I could not focus. It's not my fault you got all these little kids running around. I get it. Kids are great. Everybody loves kids. They're really cute. But they all get loud and I just can't handle it. So I don't do the whole Pesca thing because of the kids. The kids are just running around. It's easy to look at it as the kids. And God love them because Coptic kids are a certain, they're just, they're like, they're a certain species of, anyway. It's easy to look at it that way. It's maybe a little harder to look at it as it's not a coincidence that when I really wanted to focus, something was really loud in the room to stop my focus. It's a little harder maybe to say it's not a coincidence that I had this important work thing come up tonight. It's not a coincidence to say, you know what, I just happened to, I had a cold and the flu that week. Like, that's not my fault. That's just a coincidence. At some point, the coincidences aren't coincidences. At some point, I'm given a mini version of a spiritual struggle, and I'm presented with the opportunity to fight that struggle. So, the life hacks. This is the week to maximize asceticism. What does that mean? Any suggestions? What do I mean by when I say maximize asceticism? Yes.
We skipped the vegan cheesecake and the vegan poutine and the vegan mac and cheese.
Yeah. Yeah. Turn it up a notch, basically. Whatever I did during Lent, just turn it up a notch for the week. Anybody else had to do laps in gym class? I was really, really bad at running. And they used to say, oh, okay, do these laps, you're going to do the mile, and then at the end, you really want to turn it up. So you got to leave something in the tank to really turn it up at the end because you'll motivate yourself at the end. So it's the same thing. You're now at the end, really turn it up a notch. You don't have to go crazy here, but pick something. I've been doing this, I'm going to turn this up a notch. Something about my prayers, something about my fasting, something about my schedule, something about my relationship, and I'm going to make it very specific, and I'm going to write it down, and it's going to be a very discrete thing that I can do. Somebody told me this. The whole year we pray to God for a variety of things, appropriately, because He told us to pray to Him. But maybe this week, I will specifically avoid praying for anything other than my salvation. Maybe this week, I will catch myself every time I pray for mom and dad. Or maybe this week, I will catch myself every time I pray for work. Or maybe this week, I will catch myself every time I pray for peace around the world. All of which are good things to pray for. But I'm going to tell myself, maybe this week, I specifically will only pray for one thing. Comments? Somebody said, pick a gospel. Pick a gospel and just, casually read it during the week, beginning to end. Don't pick Mark every year. It's the shortest one. That's just cheating. Not like every year. You can start with that, but not like every year. Or, if you've read the Gospels enough, try the Psalms. Does anybody know at what part during Holy Week we all read the Psalms? Yeah, we're all supposed to we divide them up, we divvy them up, and we all read them. And we're because I want to go to sleep and I want to hurry up and then I want to get to sleep so I can wake up and go back to church. Well, maybe I just cheat and I start early on Monday or Sunday. The long psalm. Every hour there's a long psalm. Now you guys, this is not going to be a life hack. You guys know what to do during the long psalm. Any suggestions of what I can be during the long psalm? I was hoping, in my mind, I'm driving over here, I thought, I can get 8 suggestions probably that I haven't written down. I wrote down 4, but I figure we can come up with 8 other ones. This is a long psalm. The first psalm, you can just think of what you're going to do in the next psalm. Any suggestions? Anything at all? Yes?
Pick up a book.
Pick up a book. Perfect. So I got book. That was one of mine, by the way, so you still need 8. Yes?
Catch up on readings you've missed if you showed up late.
Absolutely. Another one of mine. Good. Any other ones?
Knit.
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 Actually read the psalm in your language of preference so you can understand.
Yeah. Actually meditate on the psalm. What's one way that I can, because it's a long psalm, because I can read it quicker than he can. So what's one way that I can turn that reading in my language of preference, English, and for me, so how can I turn that into something a little bit more, I can fill the time? So I read it, how can I make it more practical meditation for myself?
Every psalm has a message, right, of the hour. So
Yeah.
you try to link it with the Bible and with the exposition and all the other readings. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, you put it in context and then and then go back and forth between the hours and see why, what's the message, you're going from one to the next to the next.
Absolutely. Link it to the following reading. I was going to say, just bring a notebook and a pen and start writing stuff down. Any other suggestions for the long psalm?
Maybe try to learn the.
Oh yeah.
Three of the four.
Yeah, I suppose if you are the one chanting the long psalm, I guess that's what you're doing then. So read the prophecies you've missed. Read a spiritual book. You see a lot of people doing this. Meditate on the psalm and write some kind of a contemplation. Connect it to everything else. I put rewrite the exposition of that hour. Because when we read the expositions, we tend to read them in normal speaking voice, so it's pretty quick. Have you guys ever read these expositions? The messages are great. But sometimes the wording is not the wording that we would use. Have you ever read these expositions? Sometimes the expositions are archaic English.
Pray for the Nile.
Sorry?
Pray
yeah.
for the Nile.
Sometimes they're talking about praying for the Nile, which is very cool, but I've been to the Nile twice in my life, maybe. So, one thing we can, and remember, the exposition is for us, right? The exposition is supposed to be expounding the gospel. Well, maybe what I can do is I can rewrite my own little exposition. What does the gospel and the psalm in this hour mean to me? So I can take a look at the exposition while I'm reading the psalm and just ask myself, well, what's the message that I'm supposed to be getting? How would I communicate that message to myself? Anyway, that was just a suggestion. Okay, we've got long psalms. We've got short Kyrie eleisons. How many Kyrie eleisons are we doing? Lots of Kyrie eleisons. I guess in general we have a lot, but I was thinking not just Good Friday, but Holy Thursday. We just slam in another 100 on Holy Thursday, isn't that right? Right? We have like 100 on Holy Thursday and then a 412 on Good Friday. We just in a span of 36 hours, we've just got 512.
And at the end of every hour on Friday.
And then at the end of every hour. So I don't know what everybody else does, but any suggestions for what I could be doing during those Kyrie eleisons, during those metanias?
Actually do the
Okay. So, if it gets really hard to focus on just the phrase "Lord have mercy" every single time for all those times, maybe do the opposite of what I had just suggested. Maybe do the opposite of this. It may be really hard to focus 500 times in a row on my salvation. But it may not be so hard if I had a list of prayer requests for that specific time. Maybe every 10 Kyrie eleisons is for a specific request that year. And then how many is that? What's 512 divided by 10?
51.2.
Right? So can I come up with that many prayer requests? Like ahead of time? Not during it, but like ahead of time. Jot them down. And then maybe I could have them, and then that's my meditation for that time. Lord have mercy, please help me with this. Lord have mercy, please help him with this. But if you're just standing there waiting for the end of it, it's going to lose its benefit. Embrace physical suffering. Not everybody has physical suffering. we all have some kind of physical, I don't want to use the word suffering, but we all have some kind of physical ailment from time to time. Some of us more than others. Sometimes it's just something as simple as I'm very healthy, I have no excuse. I just find it really hard to kneel and pray because I'm just like, I don't have any, it's all bone down here. So it just hurts when I'm, so maybe that's what I need to embrace that week. If I just give myself a little bit of physical, I don't want to use the word suffering, but come up with another word. Discomfort. There you go. That's a good word. If I give myself just a little bit of physical discomfort, maybe that will get my mindset into the struggle that I'm trying to remember that Jesus had. It's hard to contemplate on the cross when I'm in like a fluffy pillow duvet in a comfortable bed. And then there are a lot of characters in the stories that we read in Holy Week, and they are characters that are displaced from us, but in fact are very similar to us. And maybe we can pick a few and contemplate on how we are that person sometimes. Sometimes I could be the crowd on Good Friday. Maybe I could have been the crowd on Palm Sunday and then later on the same crowd on Good Friday. I could sometimes be the high priest. Sometimes, like we talked about before, I'm the disciples fleeing. When is the last time that I was Peter denying? Or was there a time where I was Simon and I was given an opportunity? Are there times where I'm the cynical thief on the left? Are there times where I'm given the opportunity of being the shameless thief on the right who will embarrass himself in front of everybody and say what he needs to do to steal salvation? Are there times where I'm Pontius Pilate? I actually don't know. This one I was curious. I got to think longer about this one. Are there times where I'm Barabbas? Are there times where I'm Joseph and Nicodemus? Anybody know the picture on the right? It's not a specific, it was a Google image. Yeah. Are there times where I'm the
Fig tree.
fig tree? The fig tree that gets cursed? Pretty harsh, right? It's cursing a fig tree. And why did the fig tree get cursed?
There was no fruit.
There was no fruit for the fruit. But why did the fig tree not produce fruit? Bad fig tree, or what was the reason the fig tree didn't have fruit? Yeah, it was not the
time of.
It wasn't the season for fruit, and then the fig tree got cursed. Maybe there are times where I think it's not the season for me to be, it's not the time for me to be doing something right now. God understands this is not the time for me to be doing something right now. Maybe I'm missing the boat. Maybe what I think is the season for producing fruit is not actually what I've been asked to do. Maybe I'm behaving like the fig tree. Maybe I've been asked to do something out of season and I haven't been doing it. So, one thing I would say is, I highly encourage anybody who can to go to the general funeral prayer. From a church standpoint, I guess this is important because then you get prayed on. But I also would say from a preparing for Holy Week standpoint, I find it really useful the times that I've been able to go to the general funeral prayer. Again, the week ends with a funeral, and if it starts with a funeral, I find that it kind of colors the whole week for me. And again, whose funeral am I commemorating on Friday? But it was supposed to be whose?
Yours.
Supposed to be mine, right? The other thing that I once thought of, I don't know if you guys have ever thought this during the general funeral prayer, but but nobody's actually physically present at his or her own funeral. Like I guess no, that's not true. Physically present, but you know what I'm saying. So sometimes, if you find that it's easy to get distracted during the general funeral prayer, take a little bit of time to think to yourself, whose funeral would you normally attend if you had to go to a funeral? And that's kind of the funeral that you're going to. And then suddenly the distractions stop. When I start thinking about the people in my life whose funeral I would have to go to, it's a lot easier to pay attention to the prayer. When it's me, I get distracted. Anybody know what this term means? Anamnesis? It's the opposite of amnesis. Amnesis sounds kind of like amnesia. Amnesia is when so anamnesis is when so this is a term in the Orthodox concept of commemorating in a form of participation. What's the thing that we commemorate every Sunday in a form of participation? The Eucharist. But this week is a commemoration, and if I'm treating it as anything less than a participation, I may be missing the boat. This was a phrase that I heard someone say. I really liked it a lot. Sometimes I'm too busy for God. But in fact, it's okay for me to be busy. I should just be busy with God. It's okay for me to be busy. I just got to find a way to bring God along with my busyness. And then at some point I'll realize that I'm actually just bringing my busyness to God. And this was probably the best actual life hack somebody told me. Any ideas of what it was? Sorry? What am I looking at here? And so what should I do this week with my glove compartment?
Empty it.
No. Why would I? Aki, why on earth? Have you been paying attention? What should I do with my glove box? Yeah. Maybe on my way in, I just leave the phone there for 2 hours. I get it. Most of us have the pesco readings on the phone. There's another way to do that, right? You just put it on airplane mode. Any comments? Yes.
Hi, sorry, can you see for a second? I had a question about the slide where Jesus was tempted on Thursday night. I understand the inner logic of it. If I can stretch it out for a second to see if I understood it properly, it was that this is the final stretch in the fast and the Holy Land. This is the Great Land. This is one of the most iconic fasts that we have all year. I also noticed during this fast, during the whole fast, the spiritual powers, and not the good ones, the satanic powers also start challenging and trying to tempt Christians and everybody else a lot more. They start doubling down in their game. But one thing I noticed we're also learning through this whole presentation, which I think is really good. I think we should also try to double down in our spiritual life, getting closer to God, reflecting more about His sacrifice that He made for us. But then it confuses me because let's say, for example, I succeeded in that whole final stretch of the Passion Week, let alone the whole Great Lent, put it into context. But the rest of the year, I go on as I would go on any other day. So from that standpoint, have I really succeeded or have I failed? Also, vice versa, if I failed during the whole Lent and the Passion Week and Easter, but the whole year I was putting more of an effort than I did in this 50 or 55 days. So then where do we stand at that point?
I think it's an excellent question. I think, so I'll mention the first part. The idea that, okay, let's say, I really was able to turn it up a notch and kind of really get closer to God during this week. What happens when the week is over? Just because I participate in a spiritual revival, more intense period of spiritual reflection or getting closer to God, doesn't necessarily mean that it gets lost when I go back to my background day to day. It could. But the same way that my car needs an oil change, the same way that I need to shower every morning, there is something to be said for concentrating and focusing effort. Because if I tell myself, this is all stuff that I got to do every day of the year, so I'm not going to do anything different this week because I got to keep it this, I got to keep it up all the time. The truth is, human nature is that I'm going to get lazy. So if at the expense of getting lazy, the other way to do it is really kind of turn it up a notch, knowing that my relationship with Christ doesn't end at the end of a week. I think there is something to be said for it. And I don't think that necessarily everything has to be lost, even if it's subconscious. Even if it's like I gained something and I took it away with me, even, you know what I mean? It may not be that I'm as ascetic as I was during this week, but maybe there was something that came to my mind in my prayer that didn't come to my mind previously, and I can dwell on it even after.
So some of the contemplations about Great Lent and the Holy Week is that you're literally storing. And this is what also Pope Shuda said, some of his contemplations about this. And you're storing, so then the rest of the year, you're actually drawing from that. And that's what the Bible says. From the inside comes out the good and the old. So whatever you've been storing, that's what comes out, right? So if you're storing something good during the Holy Week and the Holy Fast, this is what comes out. Really, it's whatever you put into it is what you get out of it, just like work, school, whatever else you want to use.
Yeah, I do think there's something to be said for turning it up a notch for a period of time, and I can understand why logically it would kind of almost not make sense, but I do think practically it makes a difference, because otherwise I run the risk of getting complacent all year round.
So it's a replenishing standpoint, I'm guessing. So you're pretty much replenishing your spiritual stamina for the rest of the year, and then you redo next time. If I understood it correctly.
Yeah, I think, and I'm all ears for Abuna's suggestions on this. But in my mind, I think the great fear in my mind is for me to descend in a state of lukewarmness. That's the thing that I'm scared of. Because that's the greatest sin, is if I'm lukewarm and I don't notice, what happens? I get vomited out, right? That's the thing that's easy. Like when I'm at a spiritual loss, it's easier for me to hit rock bottom, maybe, and then realize where I am like the prodigal son. But when I'm just in a state of lukewarmness, that can be very dangerous, because I may never see that. And so if having a period of time where I really kind of turn it up a notch magnifies to me later on when I'm lukewarm or when I'm descending into it, and then I can remind myself what I need to do, that's worth it for me. As far as what happens during that week if I fail, what I would say is that I don't know how to address that. I would say that I should be careful about looking at it as too much of a success on my part anyway. And if there was a goal that I wanted to reach spiritually and I didn't reach it, that doesn't necessarily mean that I can't move the deadline. I don't know. What would Abuna say?
I have a couple of thoughts. First, like we are experiential people by nature. So everything that we do is an experience that registers in our memory, in our brain, in our body, everything. So stepping things up a notch is an experience. And out of this experience, we get something new. So we get something better, like it's a value-added experience. And usually this value-added experience is what is referred to as what we keep on storing. So I store something, and just by engaging into a new experience, probably or hopefully my eyes will be opened to see new things in my relationship with the Lord. And when this happens, it becomes an experience that I want to really repeat and maybe step it up a notch the following year. And then there is a following year, and there is a following year. So it's not just one time. hopefully this is not a time for me to slack off, but it's a time to make the use out of it, make the best use out of it, and maybe the following year I will even improve more. I will do even more. I will do even more. So it is an experience that registers in my memory, in my spiritual journey with the Lord, that I can draw upon this experience and make use of it. And hopefully also, maybe this is something that we can do. I went through this experience. What is it that I want to maintain and I want to make sure not to lose? So yes, I'm not going to eat, I'm going to break my fast, I'm going to eat different type of food, but maybe this is one option. Maybe when I eat this different type of food, I'm not going to be with the same, hopefully I'm not just going to switch from not eating to extremely indulging in everything. So maybe I would change, but I don't want to really indulge. Maybe I've experienced something that is nice, and I don't want to go back to indulging into a lot of food, because food, believe it or not, whether we like it or not, makes us heavy, spiritually, physically and spiritually, right? So maybe I want to come out of this with okay, so what is it? Hopefully I would have this time to sit with God and make kind of comment. What is it that I gained that I don't want to lose? Hopefully I will come out with something that I don't want to lose, that I want to maintain. Maybe it's I increased my readings, maybe from 1 chapter to 10 chapters. Maybe I like reading a lot, so maybe I'm not going to be able to maintain the 10 chapters. Maybe I want to read 3 chapters. So I want to maintain higher level than what I used to do even before. So I need to come out with some resolutions that would be beneficial to me, so the whole experience is a notch up in my spiritual journey. Does this make sense?
Thank you both for responding.
For the second part, about failure, I don't believe there is failure in this journey. I don't believe there is failure.
Really?
Yeah.
The reason I believe there's failure is because the success is going to heaven. Failing, you go to another. That's what I mean. Like, so incrementally as you go along, you fail this one time, you get to fail heavier this other time. Just like the flip side is you succeed this one time, you'll try to succeed more.
It depends about your definition of success or failure. I say there is no failure because hopefully it is a journey with Christ. As long as I am with Christ, I think this is a success. Even, just a second, don't interrupt my thoughts. So being with Christ, in my opinion, this is success. Even if I do not match up to certain achievements like others or like what I would have liked to do. Many times we judge our success by achievements only. And we forget the experience of being with Christ, as like it was mentioned, with God. The success is being with God. So being with God, I think this is by itself a success. It is a success because God is so amazingly patient and compassionate. You cannot imagine how every journey, every year, there is an increased experience, increased awareness, increased opening of the eyes and the system, opening of my eyes about who God is, because God is infinite. So there is no way that you could cover everything in one time. And every time, God opens the eyes to something new. Even if I do not open, God is still patient with me too. I'm still with you. The end of the Lent is not the end of my journey with God. I'm still going to continue my journey with God in the Holy 50, which is equally important spiritually. It's another topic.